Of course we're after Saddam Hussein, bin Laden. He's isolated.
No terrorist say poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people and the stability of the world than the regime of Saddam Hussein.
The Iraqi regime is a threat to any American.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has.
This isn't just a film about 9/11 and the wars that followed. This isn't just about the lies from the press and the Pentagon. It's about our world, and how information is conveyed, and how prejudice is fostered by deception. About how we are subjected to indoctrination and used and pitted against one another. To understand the massive military expenditures and how they are eating up so much wealth, the first hurdles we have to get over are the trust in the mass media and the stigma associated with the concept of conspiracy. Every time the CIA or any other intelligence agency does a covert operation, that's a conspiracy. It's a bunch of people getting together in secret to do something illegal and lying to everyone else.
In the Gulf of Tonkin,
They took the babies out of incubators.
We don't want the smoking gun to be a mushroom cloud.
There are a lot of strange conspiracies about many things, but that is not a reason to reject conspiracies categorically. For example, the Iran-Contra affair was a massive government conspiracy hidden from the press and public for years. It happened in my lifetime, and it involved billions of dollars in multiple countries. This was a case where one part of the government didn't even know what another part of the government was doing. Thousands of people were murdered. Multiple countries in Central America as well as Iran and Israel were involved. And yet it was kept as a total secret from the media, or perhaps by the media, for years. Not only was it possible to hide this from the public, but most of the government was unaware of the activities of a small cabal from within. Covert actions and deception in the press aren't irregular, they're normal. When patriots expose how blatantly obvious it is that there is a cover-up, regardless of how much evidence they have, the criminal's last refuge is to hide behind the stigma of conspiracy. They want you to ignore history in favor of belief based on authority. Purposely promoting the asinine obfuscates investigation, poisons credibility, and misdirects valuable time and research. State deception and conspiracy isn't rare, it's normal. Blindly believing your TV is irresponsible and it's stupid. There is nothing kooky or funny about covert warfare and assassinations. It deserves open scrutiny and sincere investigation. I'm going to show you some live clips about the truck bombings in case you never saw them, forgot about them, or don't believe me. And also pay attention to these live reports about explosions at the base, the lobby, the basement of the building. These are reports from eyewitnesses, survivors, firemen, police, and the FBI. This would all get a nice church-off whitewashing and be replaced by pancake theories on one extreme and disinformation ranging from everything from Bavarian death cults to space aliens on the other.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. According to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device, he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
That's what some people are saying. Now,
hit the base of the South Tower.
I was under the impression that it was just the actual collapse of the building, but some people are speculating that. I mean, I didn't want to say that because...
Maybe they had that was an incredible.
That was an incredible explosion.
And that does not cause from a.
I agree with you. I think it was the third plane, but again,
no, it could have been something. It could have been something that was planted.
Or a bomb planted in the building.
But as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
And you were working there? Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out.
They saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
Do we have Jim Smith available on microphone from Chopper 2 as he takes these pictures? Jim?
Yes, I am here, Michael.
Jim, tell us what's happening out there.
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center number 2, the one that is on the south that is difficult to make out.
As effective as a bomb being dropped there were two bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those two buildings and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
That would put us about a block and a half away from the site of where the explosion was. That area has just been evacuated because police have found what they described as a suspicious device, and they fear that it might be something that could lead to another explosion. Obviously, there's a real sense of caution here on the part of police. I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
Okay, I'm okay, all right? Here, move. You want to call your mother or something? All right? Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now.
We just heard another explosion. They're handing out gloves and masks.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building. But then another plane hit the other building. But when I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down, and I got smoke and everything on me. I just feel a little shook up because I got blasted, you know. So.
The ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby where they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
And even the turnstile was burnt and it was sticking up, and they just told us to run. And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
And all of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb, and it was just pounding, boom, 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 and I literally thought the subway had exploded and all the cars couldn't land on top of it because it's so loud.
I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped.
It was that he was in the lobby of World Trade Center 1 when the first plane hit, and when the debris started coming down, he went back to go into the building to protect himself and was in the revolving doors going back in off West Street when he looked up and a fireball came flying out and blew out all the windows and threw him back onto the street.
Once the plane hit the top, then that's when the bombs were going off on the first floor. It's like the planes were actually hitting the first floor. You was hearing boom, 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 boom.
Explosion that was in the World Trade Center at about 8:46 a.m. in the morning. The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then We heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong and there was a major problem.
What happened?
It was an explosion. He was in the lobby, and then the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
Like
Horrible.
hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Is that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the
Yeah, definitely secondary explosion. We was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary.
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one it was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one. Yes. Everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, and then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And they exploded. The whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
Right in front of our eyes. Just, it was so surreal, like a movie set.
Second and third explosions also, right?
We were in the building for the third one. It collapsed. It was on this drive here for the other one.
This is on top of which couldn't be no worse than this. Couldn't be nothing no more worse than this. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on the inside the building. So I don't think we get any worse than this.
Joining me is Jack Kelly. Now, he is a foreign correspondent. He has some information about these attacks. Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on at this point.
The New York City Police Department has a report that the FBI is responding to New Jersey because a truck reportedly loaded with explosives has been stopped by authorities on the road there, and the men with that truck have been detained. Members of the Joint Terrorist Task Force, according to the New York police officials, are responding to question those people. I want to underline that all the phones to police headquarters and to the FBI from here seem to be disabled.
They stopped the truck, they found an entire truck full of explosives, and they arrested them. Those 2 men and their explosives are in police custody tonight, and another tragedy has been averted.
Still alive in the rubble in and around the World Trade Center. And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives has anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects, and they're questioning them as we speak.
And that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
George Washington Bridge, Marcia.
Well, you know, Todd, it's really an amazing thing. Most of New York City's rescue operations and their police and fire departments have been concentrating their actions down in lower Manhattan, where the 2 planes hit the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. But some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives.
The FBI has now put out a nationwide APB, all points bulletin, for a white Chevy van with New Jersey registration. Written on the back is Urban Moving Systems.
There were at least 2, possibly 3 vans stopped by police on 9/11, and another 4th van spotted by a journalist. One had 5 individuals and traces of explosives. Another had 2 individuals and was packed with explosives. A 3rd van got away, and a 4th was possibly a diversion. The first van had been spotted earlier in Liberty State Park by a witness who saw 3 men celebrating and filming the World Trade Center attack. The timelines given by Sylvan Kirschberg and Paul Kirschberg, Yaron Schmel, Omar Mamari, and Oded Eldner were all over the place, and each had tickets to leave the U.S. with immediate travel dates to destinations all over the world. Oded Eldner, who had $4,700 stuffed in a sock, tried to lie to police about stopping for gas and claimed that he learned of the first explosion by telephone at 8 a.m. Problem being the first explosion wasn't until 8:45 a.m. Must have been a little nervous. Perhaps his greatest slip-up, though, was revealing that you could only see one side of one tower from the roof of Urban Moving Systems, so they moved to another spot with a full view of the length of both towers so that they could document the event. Eyewitnesses had seen them already on top of the roof of their van, posing and taking pictures, only 5 minutes after the first plane crash. Urban Moving Systems is at least 5 minutes away. They were already on the roof of a parking garage in place, looking at the north side of the North Tower, which is exactly where the plane impacted. From the police reports, we gathered a helicopter for the local radio station AM 880 can be seen in the foreground of one of the photographs taken by the dancing Israelis, and the FFA traffic records show it was hovering over the Hudson River between 8:50 and 9:03 a.m. The Israelis took 76 photographs, and eyewitnesses also saw them video recording the event. They can be visibly seen smiling. Sylvan Kirschberg is even shown flicking a green lighter as if he was at a rock concert. Interestingly, Sylvan Kirschberg had been spotted in the Doric Towers the day before on 9/10/2001. He lied to 2 men in an elevator and said that he was a construction worker. He was positively identified in the police lineup. Both Doric Tower and the World Trade Centers were highlighted on maps of the area found in the van at the time of their arrest, and Sylvan admitted to the FBI polygrapher that he had been a map maker in Israel. Why would they have maps of New York with the World Trade Centers highlighted, as well as the place they were going to film and take pictures of the event from? Sylvan was also the driver that babbled on about Palestinians without any provocation to the police at the time of their arrest, and Yaron Schmel also lied to the police about their whereabouts, claiming that they were on the west side in New York on 9A.
The story that the feds build is a very good story. When you hear their story, you start even to believe it inside. Okay, maybe I'm a spy. I'm sure that I'm not, but the story is so good, so maybe I am.
What's funny is Sylvan Kirschberg was not one of the 3 later on an Israeli talk show to talk about being busted celebrating the attacks. Yet we know he was there because he's in the photographs. Omar Mamari was not supposed to have been there, yet he switched places with Sylvan on the talk show. Maybe because both the Kirschberg brothers were flagged as Mossad agents, and they were able to hide which 3 of the 5 had been busted celebrating the attacks, until in August 2011 Freedom of Information Act, which revealed the police reports. Because of the timestamp of the bolo, as well as reports from the New York Times and Fox, we know these men had been filming the entire event, which shows prior knowledge. Because of the matching license plates, we know that this is the same van later pulled over on Route 3 in East Rutherford by police. It had 5 individuals. Now either the witness from Liberty State Park had not seen 2 of the men, or the 3 she did see had picked up 2 more. They were all Israelis, and had taken pictures of themselves flicking lighters with the burning World Trade Center in the background. The second plane had not even hit, and many assumed the first was a bizarre accident, but not these excited Israelis. They knew. Their van was traced back by its logo, Urban Moving Systems, to a front for the Israeli Mossad, Israel's CIA. 2 of the 5 men arrested's names popped up on the CFI and FBI's database as known Israeli agents. They had over $4,700 stuffed inside a sock and highlighted maps of New York and New Jersey. It gets even more interesting when the live reports report truck bombings as well as arrests, and then this suddenly disappears from the media and the American conscience. Instead, we are fed images of dancing Palestinians. It's funny how Palestinians were featured dancing on every single channel when this was a false prepackaged tape, and yet the Israelis who actually were dancing on 9/11 never see airtime. The dancing Israelis who were working for Mossad front company Urban Moving Systems get caught in a van with traces of explosives. They were filming the 9/11 attacks in New York with the planes crashing into the buildings before it happened. So they just decided to set up a film on that particular day, driving around in a van that had traces of explosives. They just strolling through, put a camera, let's point at the World Trade Center for no particular reason, just in case something happens. And then, of course, 9/11 happens. After the police pulled them over and demanded they get out of the vehicle, this is what happened, and I'll quote from Counterpunch. The driver, 23-year-old Sylvan Kurtzberg, refused and was asked several more times, but appeared to be fumbling with a black leather fanny pouch type of bag. With guns drawn, the police physically removed Kurtzberg, while 4 other men, 2 more men had apparently joined the group since the morning, were also removed from the van, handcuffed, placed on the grass medium, and read their Miranda rights. They had not been told the reasons for their arrest. Yet, according to DiCarlo's report, this officer was told without question by the driver, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problem are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem." Another of the 5 Israelis, again without prompting, told the officers, falsely, that we were on the West Side Highway in New York City during the incident. Why did they automatically assume they were being pulled over because of something to do with 9/11? Why did Yarin lie to the police without being prompted and say they were on the west side of New York when 9/11 happened, when we know they were not, as they were witnessed filming the first plane hitting and celebrating the attack, taking pictures of themselves and flicking lighters up in the air? What exactly were they hiding? They obviously knew the attack was happening. They were thrown in jail and they failed their polygraph test, but eventually they were deported back to Israel. Other Israeli spies were busted in several other states as well as Mexico, but nothing ever comes of it. Once they get arrested, the higher-ups always swoop in and deport them for visa violations. Some of the lower FBI and police are furious about this, but there's really nothing they can do about it. This event, damning as it is, has had a Lewinsky-style distraction effect, pulling attention away from the far more damning van stopped near the George Washington Bridge packed with explosives. Aside from eyewitnesses, the van bombs and arrests were reported by ABC News, CBS, CNN, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, Fox News, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the police themselves, Army Radio, several New Jersey papers, and so forth. Urban Moving Systems was only one of several fronts working that day, which also had prior access to the towers. These were not the only 2 mysterious set of vans stopped on 9/11. There was a 3rd truck, which was obviously a diversion, on King Street, which actually depicted a mural of a plane slamming into the World Trade Centers. And those 2 individuals were arrested. Obviously, this was a diversion to pull police in that direction, because no one would drive around in a truck with a painting of 9/11 on it on 9/11, unless they were purposely trying to attract the attention of the police, to pull them in a certain direction.
With a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. Alright, 10-4, I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for Westgate. The first airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. That's great. Did you listen? Did you get any further on those 2 guys over there? You alright over there, Jake? Yeah, both suspects under K. We have the suspects who live. Go with the van and
There was also an emergency 911 telephone call reporting that Palestinian bomb makers in a white van were headed for the Holland Tunnel. Unless they had a flag or something, I'm not sure how the caller would be able to tell if they were Palestinian or not. The caller, using poor English, said, "I see them at the airport mixing something, and they were dressed like sheiks, dressed like an Arab." This would have fit well with propaganda aired later in the day of dancing Palestinians celebrating the attacks on 9/11, which turned out to be a false tape. Of course, the only people driving around in vans for an intelligence agency who actually were celebrating the attacks and were caught dancing were Israelis, and the first words out of the driver's mouth were, "We're Israelis, we're not your problem, Palestinians are the problem." Apparently this idiot hadn't put it together that the plan hadn't worked out as smoothly as they had hoped. Glenn Ford also spotted another van with two individuals speaking Hebrew and taking pictures of the towers. The van must have been in the park before or just as the towers were hit, because the park was closed after the first tower was hit. It was one of the only vehicles remaining in the park. The two men lied and said they were Polish. The Israelis arrested on 9/11, who were driving around in vans that were a front for the Mossad, were detained and interrogated. They all failed their polygraph test. However, they were released by Chertoff and deported back to Israel and left alone. The owner of the Urban Moving Systems warehouse, Dominic Suter, along with his wife, fled back to Israel. The FBI raided the complex and confiscated over a dozen computer hard drives. This is a man who got a $500,000 loan just prior to 9/11, only for that year. And the FBI listed him as an official suspect of 9/11. And he remains a suspect. We got these leaked from Cryptomy. We also have copies of the Polish and Italian transcripts. But you definitely wouldn't have heard this on the mainstream media. He was allowed to return to Israel, and they have no interest in letting him go, and the press isn't going to push for it. The FBI classified what they confiscated from the hard drives. More than likely is sitting on the infamous S drive to protect itself from any Freedom of Information Act inquiries. From looking into Suter's financial records, we found that not only did the Mossad get him the loans for Urban Moving System, but also Aero trucks, all of which were involved in the 9/11 attacks. Former FBI translator and whistleblower Sibel Edmonds uncovered that condemning foreknowledge of the 9/11 attacks was missed by the FBI. Of course, it's not hard to miss when you're not even looking. Rather than investigating her findings, her superiors at the FBI covered it up, and she was released. One document in particular of recorded conversations she uncovers shed more light about the full scale of the 9/11 attack in New York. In July of 2001, 2 months before 9/11, suspects were having blueprints of skyscrapers sent by courier to an obscure region west of Baluchistan. Not only blueprints for skyscrapers, but also building and bridge plans and composites. Details are in her book Classified Woman. Not only were they interested in the buildings, but also a bridge. This fits with the people who had fake passes in the World Trade Centers, as well as those who were in a van full of bombs at the George Washington Bridge. It's also similar to the botched 1993 World Trade Center bombing, which consisted of a truck bomb at the towers and plans to blow up the Holland Tunnel. Funny how no one on the day of 9/11 thought of bringing up the Muslim Brotherhood, allegedly who solely was responsible for the last World Trade Center bombing, or even the 1993 bombing itself at all. Instead, the press compared it to Pearl Harbor and knew almost immediately that it was Osama bin Laden. Anthrax was also stolen from Fort Detrick, the same lab, just months prior to 1993's attack as well. And colleague Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind in 9/11, was the uncle for Ramzi Youssef, the ringleader of the 93 bombings, and he escaped and later bombed a plane in Japan. But let's ignore the long relationship between the Muslim Brotherhood and the CIA, or how the FBI botched their supposed sting operation, which they never showed up for even after providing the terrorists with explosives, or how another handler from the Mossad, Josie Hadass, whose apartment was the address for the Ryder truck used in the bombing in 1993, simply fled back to Israel. Just wiped 93 under the rug. Fortunately, since the cops knew what type of vans to look for, the George Washington Bridge wasn't blown. What I'd like to know is what were on the hard drives taken from Urban Moving Systems. That's not reported. The truck bombs are never followed up on, and the massive spy ring is never aired. How did the Israelis know what was going to happen? What happened to the truck bombers? Why were the reports of the truck bombs never brought up again, and the investigations into the spy rings never got airtime? Why is that? Well, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the U.S. media to do an in-depth report about it. Anything that can involve Israel is off limits. They won't even report on a 40-year, very open, very verifiable military occupation of racial colonization and ethnic cleansing that could make conquistadors blush. Israeli bulldozers in Palestine making forced segregation so that fanatical Jews can live in pure colonies. Women and her children forced to leave their home. They can't live there. They're the wrong race. God said so.
Home to 15 people, 11 of them children.
Most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett? But the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Converse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide.
He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
Now, according to the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, Flight 93 was only 20 minutes away from Washington, D.C., if it was going 580 miles an hour. The flight recorder stopped at 10:03 in the morning. That means they would have hit D.C. around 10:23 in the morning. However, had it been going back to hit Building 7 in New York, it would have hit between 10:43 and 10:46. Interestingly, at 10:45, several news outlets reported hearing a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center in the smoke.
Is just stay in your home, stay put.
And we just received word that there was a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center. We have no idea what that was, if it was related to the first two explosions, secondary explosions from the first two, or obviously other attacks.
Some sketchy information here that another explosion, a fourth explosion out the World Trade Center has gone off. One doesn't know if that's an ancillary thing because of what already happened or an additional explosion of some kind outside of that.
Rose, we hate to interrupt you. We've just been told.
A fourth explosion.
Of a fourth explosion.
Now in the area of the World Trade Center. Obviously, neither tower is still standing. We don't know the source of this fourth explosion.
One news outlet even reported that a 50-story building had collapsed.
But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by estimated that 50 stories went down.
Building 7 was 47 stories high. The timing fits and the size fits, but that building didn't collapse then. Even more interestingly is later in the day when the building actually did collapse, several news outlets again jumped the gun. The BBC report was so bad that they reported that Building 7 had fallen while Building 7 was still standing in the background of their report. A skyscraper housing offices for the CIA and, more importantly, the Security and Exchange Commission, investigating hundreds of billions of dollars worth of corporate fraud, falling straight down in a matter of seconds, isn't something you just ignore and skip. Both CNN and the BBC reported Building 7 fell before it had fallen.
We'll leave it there for the moment. We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. Many are saying is the worst attack on the country since Pearl Harbor. A huge operation is underway to find survivors from the wreckage of both towers of the World Trade Center in New York. They collapsed after hijacked airliners with passengers on board were flown into them. The 47-story Salomon Brothers building, situated very close to the World Trade Center, has also just collapsed. Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost...
Sketchy indeed. Way to jump the script, guys.
As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see
The 9/11 Commission's way of dealing with it was to not deal with it.
As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see
Don't worry, that disastrous report was just confusion. That's why they also lost their live feed, coincidentally.
Almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan. Here it is.
I want to tell you that we are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. I understand that this is a 47-story building.
That information, of course, take a look at that right-hand side of the screen.
It's going down right now.
There it is.
Yep.
It went down right there.
Now, it is very important not to over-exaggerate Building 7, as some have done, claiming there were only small pockets of fire. That is not true. That building certainly was on fire. The entire southwest corner had been eaten up. But that does not mean the building fell from fire. The southwest corner is where the giant hole is, yet it falls on the east slightly first and then uniformly drops altogether. And you don't get symmetrical collapses from asymmetrical fires. The argument that steel buildings had never fallen from fire is also disingenuous or silly, because in other fires those buildings were not hit by airplanes, nor did they have buildings fall on top of them. Like the holes in the Pentagon or the debris from '93, weak arguments and disinformation are peddled on purpose to mask a greater deception. Too much focus has been on the minutiae of the building collapses, but Building 7 did fall uniformly, and it was reported by the media both in the UK and in the United States before it actually happened. It looked rather stupid without Flight 93 reaching its final destination for World Trade Center 7, but they had to do it anyway. There have been whistleblowers, of course, even from within FEMA, but who do they turn to? They can't go to the government with it, and they certainly can't go to the mainstream media with it. So if you're asking why more people haven't come forward, how exactly would you like them to do that? Go to who? And say what? Same as the hype for Iraq. You could scream until you were blue in the face, and it wouldn't be on TV. FEMA was responsible for the 9/11 cleanup. Oddly, they were positioned in New York on September 10th, the night before the attacks.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than to spot a church and day to which we were deployed.
FEMA, along with BPAC, gave some wonderfully silly cartoon explanations for how the towers collapsed. This administration seems to love cartoons. BPAC and FEMA, of course, worked together before on the Oklahoma City bombing cover-up. Managing emergencies meant controlling the crime scenes. Jet fuel, also known as kerosene, didn't weaken or melt any of the steel. The mass media claimed that rocket fuel or jet fuel got the temperatures high enough to weaken steel on the truss and have floors collapse one by one like pancakes on top of each other, apparently with no resistance at free fall speeds as well. But here we have a woman standing in a hole next to the truss. She's not burned. She's got a towel or some papers or rag or something she was waving around. Apparently her hair and clothing and the paper or towel that she had in her hand must have been made of the same magic fibers as the passports that didn't burn. Also, in Washington, D.C., even though in New York, jet fuel could leave molten steel and metal in the basements of the building and weaken the truss to the degree to drop all their weight, the same jet fuel from the same type of airplane couldn't even burn wooden stools, plastic computers, and paper books. That must be it. Things made of paper, like passports and books, don't burn in fire, but metals do. Welcome to Bizarro World Physics. To pretend that America's foreign policy is based on benevolence is outstandingly ignorant. To deny the actuality of covert actions and massive deception is equally as asinine. There are way too many counterexamples of successful conspiracies and hoax. The media doesn't report it. The media is owned by the Pentagon. They have overlapping board of directorates. It is one large corporation. They lie. With the profitable Cold War over and hundreds of billions in security fraud and a network of mediums to obfuscate off-the-books financing for covert and illegal operations under investigation, an event was needed to cover the old crimes and create the atmosphere for new ones. This wasn't for America or solely by American elements. It was multinational. Showing that 9/11 was done and why it was done and who covered it up isn't the same as how it was done. Of the 1,275 deaths in the North Tower, 943 were Marsh & McLennan or Cantor and Fitzgerald employees. The plane flew right into Marsh & McLennan's floors between 93 and 98. In the South Tower, 270 of the 490 deaths were from Eurobrokers Inc. and Aon Corp. We've seen airplanes and truck bombs, but what about the other explosions higher up in the towers? If bombs were inside, how could they be set in there with so many employees working in the towers? And who did it? You can forget about security, that's a non-issue. But exactly how and where could one place charges without anyone noticing? A good place to start would be the men arrested for fake IDs that granted them access to the towers to fix sprinkler systems, upgrade internet cables, move out furniture, and work on chronically broken elevators, especially when the Israeli-owned company they claimed to work for had no authenticity. Movers bring the goods, elevator and cable mechanics set them in place, maintenance shuts down the fire prevention system. Quick 3-step plan.
Any sense at all, have you heard anything even anecdotally from the cops about how many people managed to get out of the building before they collapsed?
No, absolutely not, but there's also, I don't know if it was the case now, but I do know that one of the towers had a major elevator that went all the way to the top that was malfunctioning and has been malfunctioning for at least a month. They've been having a lot of trouble with that.
Aside from the mysterious elevator workers of the oddly chronically broken elevators and the Israeli movers contracted by Zim Shipping Company, itself partly Israeli state-owned, which broke a $50,000 lease in the World Trade Center to relocate to Virginia a week before 9/11, who else had suspicious access to the towers? In 2002, a simple case of fraud over fake IDs in Tennessee led to the arrest of 6 Middle Eastern men and revealed damning information about 9/11, about men claiming to have done work in the basement of the towers with fake passes. The key witness, herself an accomplice in the ID fraud, was killed a day before her trial date. Catherine Smith, a Department of Motor Vehicles employee, had been working with Khalid Otala from Jerusalem to provide Tennessee licenses, which do not require social security numbers, for 5 other men. The FBI, working on a tip, arrested Otala outside the DMV after he purchased the IDs from Smith. They had been monitoring Catherine Smith's house. She had also bought her car from Otala, one she would be found dead inside of later. The following group, Mohammed Fairs, Abdel Muhsin Hamad, Mostafa Abu Shahid, and Omar Kayata, were all arrested as they were also waiting outside for Otala to return from the DMV. The underlings told investors that Khalid or Sakur Hamad, the cousin of Abdul Muhsin Hamad, could get the IDs. Oddly, the two ringleaders would be released while the underlings had the book thrown at them. Sakur Hamad, who had shared a residence with Otala Khalid, was arrested, and on his person he had a pass granting him entry into the 6 underground levels of World Trade Center 1. It was dated September 5, 2001. Khalid Otala had also driven a truck from New York to Tennessee on 9/11. Hamad claimed that he had been doing work on the sprinkler systems for a couple of days, and that is why he had a pass. The problem with that, as Alan Hicks, the spokesperson of the Port Authority of New York, pointed out, the New York Port Authority handles its own work on such systems, and no one there had contracted Hamad. Hamad gave police a card for magic heating and plumbing. He also had a card at the time of his arrest. In court, his father produced a letter signed by Sergei Davydenko for Denko Mechanical, verifying both Sahira Mohammed and his cousin's employment. Davydenko told the New York Times Hamad had been working in the World Trade Center for him for a couple of days. The problem is, there was no magic heating and plumbing or Denko Mechanical. There was an obsolete business license for Denko, and the address for the office was simply Davydenko's residential address. Quite similar to the elevator operator's fiasco. One woman who may have been able to shed light on the entire matter was Catherine Smith, but the day before her trial, she had a car accident and died. Actually, her body had been burned inside her car, but the gas tank failed to ignite. Witnesses had seen Smith ablaze in her car, and investigators found gasoline in her clothing. FBI agent Susan Nash said Smith had been murdered. The unresolved questions about 9/11 and Smith's death had nothing outside of the circumstantial to do with the trial over fake IDs, however. Hamad was released on a $250,000 bail. What kind of truck driver or repairman has that kind of money? And Otala, the middleman, was released hours after being sentenced. Why was Khalid released? And why wasn't there a follow-up investigation into Denko Mechanical? George Bush Sr. was the director when the CIA was preparing intelligence cells in Pakistan and Afghanistan to fight a proxy war of the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Call them modern privateers. It's worth it to take the time to explain what a privateer is. Back in the day, when pirates were the great outlaws, a country could attack another country and risk war, or they could covertly pay pirates to do it, which would make them privateers. For example, if the British wanted to attack a Spanish ship coming out of the Caribbean, they couldn't do it with an English ship with an English flag, because that could start a war. And at that time, Spain was really strong. So what they could do is pay off a pirate to do it. The pirate, who has a relationship to the royals, would be sharing their loot and paid by the state secretly. They would never attack British ships, they would only attack foreign ships, French, Spanish, whatever. And if a pirate attacks a ship and gets caught, they hang. No war. He did it as an individual. There's nothing they can do about it. This is a way the British could routinely attack Spanish ships covertly through privateers. All the Spanish could do was to continue to routinely capture individual pirates, try them, and hang them. And the British, of course, would act like they were trying to fight pirates too. The whole time, however, they had their own payroll with their own pirates who attacked who they asked them to attack. This system of privateering is exactly how our modern terrorist cells work. The United States and other nations payroll their own terrorist groups, such as Al-Qaeda. They'll attack the Russians in Afghanistan, they'll attack the Russians in Chechnya, they'll fight for us in Bosnia and Kosovo and wherever we tell them to, including the United States itself, in a false flag operation. If a terrorist is caught or killed, so what? They're just a terrorist. But the fact that the CIA puts them on the payroll means they're our terrorists. They are modern privateers. You can look at Libya or Syria as an example. The U.S. paid off a bunch of Salafi jihadist religious nuts to go and do its fighting for them, and NATO did the air campaign in Libya. They couldn't do the same thing in Syria because of Syria's anti-air defense, but they've continually, through Qatar, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, multiple countries note, as well as the same Salafi jihadists they used in Libya, moved the terrorists into Syria, called them the Free Syrian Army, and are terrorizing Syria. These are known terrorists, real terrorist organizations, and the privateers were often real pirates as well. But there are portions of them, especially in the leadership, which are being paid off by intelligence agencies. And the money for this comes from the drug war, because Congress can't appropriate money to say, hey, we're going to go pay terrorists with that. Even the CIA likes to lie. You say, well, why would they lie? They do. They probably could have just said, F you world, and gone ahead and did a war in Iraq, but they didn't. They lied about weapons of mass destruction and mobile labs and anthrax and yada yada. They're still at the point where they feel like they have to at least try to lie to us. And the CIA lies. Making everything secret also makes everything a lot more expensive and people more manipulatable. It's easy to control the middlemen this way. The opium from Afghanistan. It's used both in heroin and morphine, so legal and illegal drugs. But this money for the illegal drugs is where they're using the black budgets for the black operations to pay off our privateers to hit targets without having to risk our own soldiers. This is why on 9/11 it was so confusing and strange that the FBI and the NSA and our different alphabet soup organizations were fighting internally with themselves to allow certain terrorists to live openly in the United States and blocking investigations into them because they were our terrorists. There is a look-away list for our own privateers. Al-Hazmi and Al-Midhar were examples of this who had been used in the USS Cole bombing previously. Now it's up to you to think, did our privateers double-cross us, or was it the plan the whole time? You may ask, was that A, incompetence, because our government is incredibly stupid, B, malevolence, they planned the whole thing and they're genius and they pulled it off like that, or C, a portion of them know what's going on, majority of them are in the dark, and the faction puppeteering everyone else is using them because they surround themselves with dupes and incompetent people on purpose because they're easy to manipulate, and that's how our government works. I go with option C. This system of proxy wars and false flags and using mercenaries really escalated during the time of the Cold War. Because of the advent of the nuclear bomb and mutual destruction, the only way to really go to war any longer was to attack through proxy and to use mercenaries and to only attack nations that didn't have the bomb. Of course, they could be backed by other nations that did, which is why everyone is racing to get nuclear weapons. As we can all see what happened when Gaddafi decided not to, he ended up getting sodomized by a knife. But if you knock out the drug war, and we're talking about $64 to $65 billion a year annually from opium out of Afghanistan, you would pull the plug on the finances for a lot of these black operations. And people can see clearly, there is no grassroots revolution in Syria. These are paid-off mercenary groups. And each party and each faction have different interests for wanting to topple the regime. But if you think it's too complicated for multiple nations to get together and use mercenary groups to attack other nations or themselves, think again. Syria is a very clear example. Iran-Contra is another example where multiple nations got together, secretly created a lot of money selling drugs and weapons, and paid off mercenaries to fight in a third country, in Nicaragua. And 9/11 worked very much the same way. Our own Al-Qaeda attacked the United States with the U.S.'s own help, and it was covered up by the same intelligence agencies that started it to begin with. It acted as the pretext for the war on terror, which replaced the Cold War to justify all the massive military spending we've seen since, and the erosion of civil liberties and the rise of a despotic, fascist police state. Phase 1, secure Afghanistan, control the opium trade, which the Taliban had cut off. It's the Opium Wars too, just as the British had done before. The U.S. can create mass mercenary armies and foster and utilize terrorist groups at will. There's a reason Al-Qaeda has never attacked Israel. A war on terror is endless profiteering. The U.S. will have been in Afghanistan for over a dozen years soon. The objective has never been about winning, much less women's liberation or fighting for freedom. The whole point is to prolong conflict for as long as possible. This is why the U.S. preaches a war on terrorism while simultaneously engaging in acts of terrorism itself. And it doesn't matter if that's the slow boil by drones or by the quicker boil by privateer proxies. It could be Belhas in Iraq or Libya, MEK in Iraq and Iran, Jandala in Baluchistan, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Nusra in Syria, or the foreign aid RINA governments, which work in the same way as the privateer models, such as Al-Hadi in Yemen, formerly Mubarak in Egypt, Museveni in Uganda, Paul Kagame in Rwanda, Sheikh Sharif, Al-Khalifa, Franco, and so on, and of course, Karzai in Afghanistan. The U.S. began its Al-Qaeda Frankenstein back in the 80s by backing the Mujahideen and their mercenary special forces Al-Qaeda, and then the Taliban in their civil war, and then the U.S. changed sides on paper to the Northern Alliance, but in reality it's just the CIA's occupation of the country for its own interests. The American government had a hand-in-glove relationship with Osama bin Laden while they were fighting the Soviets together. This privateer had a religious following and a lot of financial overlap with Saudi Arabia, who finances all of the extreme Wahhabi Sunni terrorist factions.
In the early 1980s, bin Laden worked with operatives from U.S. intelligence, the Pakistani military, and Arab states. They ran a wide-ranging covert network that recruited and financed Muslim fighters to battle the Soviet army.
These units were used again to finance 9/11 hijackers, who were under the protection by top officials of Chertoff and Goss, who intentionally stifled FBI attempts to investigate members of these cells, thus assuring 9/11's success. The question is, did the privateers double-cross the U.S. in a form of blowback, or was it jointly planned? It was planned and assisted. Not only were the bagmen who financed the operation protected, the hijackers themselves were relocated 2 steps ahead of the FBI, thanks to the Israelis' phone taps and monitoring of both the feds and the hijackers themselves.
Some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place.
They also monitored the airports and planes. Those were needed to explain and justify the event. The assured damage was done by bombs within the buildings. As you already saw, bombs and bombers were found on 9/11. The bombers were released, and the steel from the building was quickly destroyed, shipped off to China and India. There is no way this was done simply as a double cross. No one but the government itself would have the means to do something like run a drill of the exact scenario of 9/11 on 9/11 to assure that interceptors would be too far away and confused to stop the planes.
Hi, Boston Center TMU. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys to, we need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise.
Dick Cheney, vice president and husband of the president of Lockheed Martin and the leader of Project 908, purposely held back defense until it was too late to act. Bin Laden did not have the authority or power to force FBI agents off of his trail. Bin Laden didn't have the means to set up a false flag and steal anthrax from within American labs and take credit for it with his hijackers and associate it to Iraq to falsely lead America into believing that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were together and start a war there to bog down American forces. The U.S. and Israel did that all on their own. Robert Mueller, the former director of the FBI, finally told CNN in September of 2002 that, quote, there was no legal proof to prove the identities of the suicidal hijackers.
To invade Iraq when the intelligence assessments of the professional analysts of the intelligence community did not provide the desired compelling case.
These monstrous lies were told by embedded Zionist journalists who worked with the administration's PNAC members. For example, the lie that the lead hijacker of 9/11, Mohammed Atta, met with agents of Saddam was repeated by William Safire of the New York Times, May 9, 2002, which came from PNAC's Gary Schmidt, who wrote it in 2001 for the Weekly Standard, an outfit run by PNAC's co-founders Crystal and Kagan. The story was leaked to Rutgers September 18, 2001, just a week after 9/11, and the same day as the first anthrax mailing. Wow! They knew about the lead hijacker as well as a meeting that never took place within 7 days. They probably wanted to follow up on this sooner than they did, adding the anthrax part of the lie, assuming the first letter would be opened in just a couple of days, but the mail didn't work like that. Reminds me of the BBC report plagiarized from a college student in California. This Atta met with Iraqi intelligence lie was repeated by Vice President Dick Cheney December 9, 2001 on national television. He later denied it in spite of being on tape saying it.
You have said in the past that it was, quote, pretty well confirmed.
No, I never said that.
Okay. I
never
think
said
that is...
No, it's absolutely not. What I said was, it's been pretty well confirmed that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service in Czechoslovakia last.
Gary Schmidt of PNAC wrote, shortly before getting on a plane to fly to New Jersey from Europe in June 2000, Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker of the first jet airliner to slam into the World Trade Center and apparently the lead conspirator in the attacks of September 11th, met with a senior Iraqi intelligence official. This was no chance encounter. Rather than take a flight from Germany, where he had been living, Atta traveled to Prague, almost certainly for the purpose of meeting there with Iraqi intelligence operatives Ahmad Samir Ahani. This was a complete lie designed to connect Al-Qaeda to Iraq and thus Iraq to the 9/11 attacks. It was false. Yet all the corporate news networks repeated it anyway because it had been in the New York Times. Of course, the Prince of Darkness was a message force multiplier. December 28, 2001, in an op-ed in the New York Times, Richard Pearl wrote, "We must strike Iraq. Evidence of a meeting in Prague between a senior Iraqi intelligence agent and Mohammed Atta, the September 11th ringleader, is convincing." Another PNAC troll, Paul Wolfowitz, added, "Like the meeting of Mohammed Atta with Iraqi officials in Prague, I think the premise of a policy has to be we can't afford to wait for proof beyond a reasonable doubt." February 23, 2002, in the San Francisco Chronicle. Pearl was the chairman of the Defense Policy Board in the DoD and involved in too many other criminal activities to get into just yet. Paul Wolfowitz was the Deputy Secretary of Defense and later the head of the World Bank, and also involved in too many crimes to get into just yet. There seems to be a lot of mystery surrounding Mohammed Atta. He's the lead hijacker, dubbed so by the mass media. He was the one used to link Iraq to anthrax, unfairly. And then this guy takes a bag with him on his final attack with all the plans in it and all the names of all the hijackers on his final flight, which if discovered would ruin the entire thing. Agents in the Able Danger program tracking Atta had their reports redacted and their accounts omitted from the 9/11 Commission report, even after Zelikow assured them that it would be in there. They say they're afraid of our own government, and when Colonel Schaefer wrote a book about it, the Pentagon bought up the copies and burned them. Something to hide?
Doing some follow-up on what we knew about Mohammed Atta leading up to 9/11.
That's right. Some witnesses, apparently there was a redacted form of what people in the intelligence community knew regarding that man right there, Mohammed Atta, and in the Able Danger program. And apparently the report had been redacted. All the names had been blacked out. Well, FoxNews.com got a clean copy and called a number of the witnesses, 5 in all. All of them said that we told investigators one thing, and none of those things actually showed up in the 9/11 Commission. And in fact, the investigators from the Department of Defense were a little agitated and seemed aggressive.
So why wouldn't that show up in that report? Well, these 5 witnesses claimed that the Defense Department was worried about taking some of the blame for 9/11. But here's what I don't understand. Why wouldn't they put in the report these findings? Because maybe that would look at least like they were kind of following the trail of Mohammed Atta instead of just having this whole situation happen. You know, at least it gives the American public the image that at least we're kind of on to him.
Yeah, but then,
I don't know which one's worse.
But were we on to him, and did we have a picture of him, and did we know that? Did we know him by name? And the name at that point was Mohammed El Sayed. And if we did know him, why didn't we stop him? That's the problem.
But does it look any worse than in August, bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S.? That looks bad. There was so many mistakes. There was so many times where we had a chance to get bin Laden. You can go back and back and back. But for some reason, the Defense Department put their line in the sand and said these 5 people that brought up the fact that we were tracking a cell that included Mohammed Atta in it leading up to 9/11 was redacted, not included. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer would not stand for this. He said it was called Operation Able Danger, and we were tracking Mohammed Atta. And when he was interviewed by Phil Zelkow, who ended up joining the State Department, he said, you know, Tony, this is an important part of the story. We'll make sure it's in the 9/11 report. And it wasn't. There was no follow-up. And Colonel Schaefer would not be corralled. Now, I don't understand how this led to Operation Dark Heart and the purchases of 9,500 books by the Defense Department that were hensely destroyed.
That were written by Schaefer.
Written by Schaefer.
His new book.
They burned them.
They did.
Well, what's going on? Because some people who agreed to speak to FoxNews.com did so without giving their names because they fear repercussions. I mean, come on. What kind of repercussions could there? I mean, I believe that they fear repercussions. What I'm saying is, why should they be put in that position where they would actually fear that? I mean, aren't we all on the same team here? I think.
Oh, somebody's on the same team, all right, but we're not on it. Yes, Atta's full name and his cell number had been known since at least February of 1999. Atta's handler or case agent, Mohammed Zammar, who had also recruited Marwan al-Shahib, was on Flight 175 in 2 different money conduits, Saeed Bahaji and Ramzi bin al-Shib, had fought in Bosnia and Afghanistan, and he, Ramzi, Atta, and Marwan all lived together. Zammar's phones had been tapped, and he had also been mapped by Able Danger, but the CIA acts like they learned everything after the Moroccans captured Zammar and sent him to Syria to be tortured. Yet the CIA had been snooping on the man that recruited and set up financial channels for hijackers while he was recruiting them. They had Marwan and Atta's cell numbers and did nothing. Nothing aside from cover it up, that is.
Months before the attack, a military intelligence unit identified 4 men as terrorists with al-Qaeda connections, but government lawyers told them not to share the information with the FBI.
According to Congressman Curt Weldon, it was a secret Pentagon intelligence unit, codenamed Able Danger, that knew a year before 9/11 that lead hijacker Mohammed Atta was in the United States and connected to al-Qaeda.
And as you can see, they identified Mohammed Atta's cell.
In the summer of 2000, he says, the Pentagon Special Ops Command had identified 2 terrorist cells inside the U.S. and knew of the connection between Atta and 3 other men who became hijackers.
So a year before 9/11, they had their picture, they had the picture of Mohammed Atta, and they knew roughly where he was?
Yes.
Weldon, who's a ranking member of both the Armed Services and Homeland Security Committees, says he got this story from 3 agents in the Able Danger unit, one of whom confirmed this to CBS News. But there are major questions. If the Pentagon ever knew in advance about Mohammed Atta, that was news to Secretary Rumsfeld.
I have no idea. I've never heard of it until this morning.
It was also news to the 9/11 Commission, which looked extensively at Atta's history. One Pentagon agent says he told the Commission staff about Atta. The Commission says the agent never mentioned Atta's name.
After all, that name was very familiar to us. And if his name had been mentioned, it would have set off all kinds of alarm bells.
He was one of 2 agents allowed to talk to the 9/11 Commission to tell them this same story, says he did so. And here the 9/11 Commission says flatly that they had no prior knowledge about Mohammed Atta in this country.
There have been several Osama bin Laden tapes to hit the news, as well as Al-Qaeda tapes, and these things are fake. They seem to pop up regularly when Bush was up for re-election.
This will assure his followers that A, he's alive and well, he's still in the game, and his followers, Rick, just haven't seen him, and when they do, it's likely to invigorate the movement. He's still very much the inspiration for Al-Qaeda.
How do we know that this thing is legit?
Well, you know, this is being flagged by Al-Sahab, which is Al-Qaeda's media arm, and every other video or audio message that's come out that's been flagged by Al-Sahab has been legit, Rick, so we expect that this one will be too.
One of the bin Laden tapes was so bad that it actually took footage from a film made in 2006 called Road to Guantanamo and passed it off like it was original footage. This made it on all the networks. After these debunkles, they go to voice-only tapes, but those get debunked as well. But one would think anything supposedly from Osama bin Laden would be under the microscope more than anything else and have more scrutiny than anything else, and yet Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden are on the news multiple times as known fakes.
Adam Gadon, the so-called American Al-Qaeda who proclaimed himself the media maven, if you will, for Al-Qaeda and was helping to produce a lot of these so-called Al-Qaeda videos that were all over the internet that made Al-Qaeda look really bad and made the Muslims look bad.
Should you fail to comply in full, we will deem it sufficient justification to continue to fight and kill Americans.
Come to find out, Adam Gadon's real name was Adam Perlman. And not only was he, in fact, Jewish, he was the grandson of a member of the board of the Anti-Defamation League. And if you've been following the history of the Anti-Defamation League, you will find out they've been very much involved in covertly supporting a lot of these so-called American Nazi movements. In fact, all the way back, just about the time of World War II, there was this scandal where the head of the American Nazi Party, which had a total membership of like 6, and yet they were getting all this press, was arrested for embezzling from his sponsors, which turned out to be the ADL, so that kind of blew up in their faces. So anyway, we have Adam Perlman, and he's been going around saying, I'm Al-Qaeda, see, I got a turban on my head, I'm a terrible Muslim, gotta hate me, gotta be afraid of me, and of course everybody's laughing at him now because we all know who he is. Okay, so they have brought in the understudy, and there is a new American Al-Qaeda named Yusuf al-Khattab. Ooh, big scary name, and they've got a picture of him out there where he's holding all these guns and knives, and he's dressed up like a wannabe Rambo, and he's scowling at the camera, and he supposedly has this website with things in it, like pictures of the Statue of Liberty with an axe buried in the back of the head. I mean, very heavy-handed, very over-the-top.
There was also a link to a puppet show mocking Danny Pearl's beheading. Take a look.
Oh, that's awful. You know, just looking more like a movie prop than anything else here. So, as it turns out, this is another fake. His real name is Joseph Cohen.
He's a 39-year-old New York City taxi driver, as you mentioned. He calls himself Yusuf al-Khattab, but he was born Joseph Cohen here in America. He is a Jew.
And he is another manufactured front to try and convince Americans that Al-Qaeda is actually here in the United States. And this is why we've got to be doing this, doing surveillance on the American people and reading their email and listening to their phone calls and all this stuff, because you never know when we're going to get into a situation with the American Al-Qaeda. And it's all a front. It's a fake.
He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realized that this was the term the Americans had given him.
There was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of the side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress, yes. A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see, secret exits on the side and on the bottom, cut deep to avoid thermal detection, a ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks, even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
Oh, I think we've seen this cartoon rhetoric before. There weren't many of those. There weren't any of those. And yet the very fraudulent Osama bin Laden confession tapes give praise to people who weren't even involved. I'm going to agree with Seymour Hersh's investigation in the New Yorker. Whatever trail was left deliberately for the FBI to find. He was told by a senior military officer, because of the visas and other documentation needed to infiltrate team members into the United States, a major intelligence service might also have been involved. Yeah, you think?
We would like to correct a report that appeared on CNN last night. Based on information from multiple law enforcement sources, CNN reported that Adnan Bukhari and a brother Amir of Vero Beach, Florida, were suspected to be two of the pilots who crashed into the World Trade Center. Today, CNN learned that Adnan Bukhari is still in Florida, where he was questioned yesterday by the FBI, and after taking a lie detector test, today he was cleared of involvement in Tuesday's airliner attacks. We are sorry for the misinformation. Through his attorney, Bukhari says he is not connected at all with this, that he is helping authorities, and that any documents that they found with his name means his identity was stolen. He says Amir Bukhari, who he says is not his brother, died in a small plane crash last year.
The living Omari, who is the FBI's current and second pick, reported that his passport had been stolen. This is worse than his year forgeries, and yet, where was the media? Osama bin Laden's brother was having breakfast with George Bush's father to discuss business deals. George Bush Jr. was in Florida reading a book to some kids. Apparently this book had a little television inside of it which magically had the first plane hitting the towers on it, because Bush claimed not once but twice that he saw the first plane hit. That was impossible because coverage of the first plane hitting didn't air on the day of 9/11. It came after, when they found the French filmmakers who caught the attack serendipitously.
Chief of Staff, well, first of all, when we walked in the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error.
It's almost as if he had rehearsed what to say and then royally messed it up.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And
why didn't the Secret Service react after this second plane hit to get the president out of his publicly announced location if they were so worried about terrorism? And where was Mr. Dick? Dick Cheney was in a PEOC bunker making damn sure the next plane hit its target. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta recounts.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Did Cheney order a stand down or a shoot down? Considering that he tries to lie about his whereabouts, and the little fact that the Pentagon was hit, shows that the order wasn't a shoot down, and the young man wouldn't be questioning the orders or quoting the miles either if it were. By default, the orders are to stand down until the proper authorities say to shoot down. Thus the man was asking, are the orders to still stand by for orders to shoot? Because the plane is really close. The 9/11 cover-up or commission will claim that Dick Cheney didn't arrive at the Presidential Emergency Office Center until 9:58 a.m. They can't take a later timestamp than that because we have a photograph of all of them at 9:59 when the first World Trade Center was collapsing. This is a half hour after Mineta overheard the conversation about the plane being 50 miles out. This would place Dick Cheney there after the Pentagon had been struck. And they will claim the conversation about 50 miles out and 10 miles out was about Flight 93, not Flight 77. There's a big problem with that. If they were talking about Flight 93 was never 50 miles away, much less 10 miles out. Flight 93 went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is a hell of a lot further than 10 miles from D.C. Norman Mineta arrived at 9:20, and Cheney and Rice were already there. Richard Clarke, the terrorism czar, stated in his book Against All Enemies that he arrived at 9:03, just as the second plane had hit the World Trade Center, and shortly after, certainly before 9:58, went into the Presidential Emergency Office Center to find that Cheney and Rice were already there, and recalls that later Mineta arrives at around 9:20 because they were looking for him. That means that Cheney was there between 9:03 and 9:20, if not earlier. White House photographer David Burr would tell Peter Jennings at ABC News that shortly after 9, the Secret Service came to Cheney's office and said, "Sir, you have to come with us." And Cheney himself said on Meet the Press on September 16, 2001, "When I arrived there in short order, we had word the Pentagon had been hit." So that's 3 eyewitnesses plus Cheney himself confirming that Cheney was there before the Pentagon was hit. Of course, the White House photographer and the Vice President gave these accounts before the Mineta testimony to the 9/11 Commission. Also, Condoleezza Rice and the Commission claimed that she arrived there shortly after Cheney. It would be an extremely narrow window for Rice to arrive after Cheney after 9:58. And yet all of them are there for the photograph at 9:59 of the World Trade Center collapsing. There is no way she had all those conversations with Clarke and the principals within those seconds. Dick Cheney and Lee Hamilton are liars, no shock there. And the 9/11 Commission would delete Norman Mineta's testimony from their video archives. However, we recorded it from C-SPAN. It wasn't just moles in the State Department and DOD impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11 suspects. The FBI was impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11. With all the obvious mistakes about the hijackers' identities, the phony bin Laden tapes, the physics of the building, the lies about the anthrax, the lies about weapons of mass destruction, the way the whole narrative was woven together with 9/11, you'd think somebody should be explaining this. There ought to be an investigation into this. Let's take a look at a couple of the alleged hijackers of Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon. And an airplane did hit the Pentagon. I hate to have to do this, but I have to spend a little bit of time debunking some other hypotheses about a missile hitting the Pentagon. This is one of the tactics that can be used to discredit conspiracy theories, is to just promote heavily a bunch of wild and crazy ones, which has been done on 9/11, and it ranges from the super ridiculous about morphine aliens and miniature nukes and things on into missiles and pods and other propaganda. What happens is when someone tries to approach the topic of 9/11, if the other person has already heard all of these crackpot theories, they don't want to listen to it and they're turned off to the subject on it, and furthermore, they're not going to research it any further because they assume, oh, it's all that stuff. A plane did hit the Pentagon, but there was a lot of propaganda about the Pentagon strike and a missile hitting the Pentagon, much of it promoted by a film called Loose Change. It's also incorrect to go overboard and accuse anybody who has promoted propaganda to be an agent of the government or something. Most of it is just disinfo from people who were honest yet ignorant about what they were talking about. Never mind all the evidence of a plane hitting the Pentagon and no evidence of a missile or a Global Hawk hitting the Pentagon, and no explanation of where the plane everyone saw going to the Pentagon went because no one saw it leave. Forget all that. People really cling to this missile BS, but it's based on lies. They have very strong emotional opinions about it because they've been fed a bunch of BS, so I will be addressing that. I have to laugh when people say that Hani Hanjour couldn't have taken the angled 270-degree turn because he was a bad pilot, and then in the same breath say it was a missile that hit the Pentagon. Obviously the flight path they're tracking is of a plane. A missile certainly didn't do a 270-degree loop around Northern Virginia and Washington, D.C. without anybody noticing. However, a lot of people saw the plane. We'll come back to the so-called hijackers in 9/11 and why that nonsense doesn't even matter, but one of the primary arguments for a missile is actually an argument against a plane. They don't have any evidence for a missile. The common tactic here is to say, well, the FBI seized all the video footage of the attack. But that's no more evidence of a missile hitting than a dragon blowing a fireball through the wall. There are other reasons to seize the video footage of the plane hitting, particularly if there were secondary explosions which were reported at the Pentagon as well as in the World Trade Centers, and you can't have that on tape. If the plot is to hit the building with a plane, you better hit the building with a plane. There's no reason not to just crash the plane into the building. There is no motive to fire a missile or a different type of plane. They won't release the footage of the Oklahoma City bombing either. That doesn't mean a missile hit it. It might mean that there were bombs in the building and there was 2 drivers in the Ryder truck. They could be concealing that instead. Just because you don't have something on film doesn't mean you have the right to just make up whatever you want and declare it true based on nothing. Well poisoners like to say the size of the hole in the Pentagon doesn't match up to a Boeing 757. The way they promoted this propaganda was easy. They simply lied. It's called creating a straw man. They show you a hole, which is not actually the hole, and then go on and on about how a plane couldn't possibly fit into that hole, and that the naysayers are trying to say a plane did fit into the hole. That entire premise is bogus. The propagandists are lying to you. This is what they did. This is the hole they like to show on websites and in the movie Loose Change. This is an exit hole in Ring C, which is sometimes falsely portrayed as an entrance hole. They like to say the soft nose cone of the fuselage couldn't possibly have done it. Well, Sherlock, it doesn't have to. That punch-out's probably from the landing gear, the front tires of the airplane, which were not out since they had no interest in landing it, and for the fact that broken landing gear is sitting in front of the hole. This is the actual hole. It's over 100 feet across, and the 18-foot hole is just on the second floor. The whole first floor was knocked out, but what Loose Change likes to do is to deliberately omit the entire hole in the first floor and only show you the second floor and the exit hole. That's either A, on purpose, B, because they're incredibly stupid, or C, because they're mindlessly parroting disinformation. I go with C, but it's up to you. The following are pictures from Loose Change. Here's one with smoke obscuring the entire right side, and there and left, this is from 9/11 research, this picture is showing the portion of the building that they're willing to let you see. Here's the next picture. Again, lots of steam and smoke and water is blocking the entire southern portion of the picture. All you see is the second floor up. All of that where the plane entered has been removed. They selected this picture again with the water hoses covering the hole in the bottom. All of that is missing. And they show you this tiny hole and act like a plane had to fit in there, and they give you this computer simulation. It's pure propaganda.
The only damage to the outer wall is a single hole, no more than 16 feet in diameter. A Boeing 757 is 155 feet long, 44 feet high, has a 124-foot wingspan, and weighs almost 100 tons. Are we supposed to believe that it disappeared into this hole without leaving any wreckage on the outside?
What Loose Change is doing is taking this and changing it into this. And if that's all the data you had, like a global warming nut with only a slice of the pie, you would go on believing something ridiculous. Another claim they have is about the lawn not having a scratch on it, because they show you pictures like this. They don't show you this. Does that look like it doesn't have a scratch on it? The lawn is not even what's adjacent to the building. What's adjacent to the building is a parking lot and then the lawn, and both were severely screwed up, but once again Loose Change cherry-picked its pictures just like it did with the hole. They only showed the hole in the second floor, not the massive gaping hole in the first floor. The aerial photos of the Pentagon showing rings from above are not what was below. The first floor was open, wide open, with columns, not walls. Therefore, it went through the first wall, and the only other wall was in Ring C, where the landing gear punched through and made that hole. If you don't understand the structure of the rings, it went like this. Here's a picture. Okay? Always get your premise straight before you let your imagination wander. They show you a picture of a little hole, the hole is actually bigger. They show you a picture of all these rings, the first floor is actually clear through. It's lies. And what it does, this is the point of that. When you think a missile hit the Pentagon, not only do you look retarded and make people not want to look at 9/11 or listen to any of it at all, even with much more clear evidence with Building 7 and so on, it makes you wonder, oh, the pilot couldn't have flown in there. That makes you accept the whole hijacker narrative about Hanjor and everything. And we know that isn't true. The reason people have trouble with the holes in the physics of the Pentagon is because they don't actually know the real size of the holes. They've been lied to by propaganda. This film that came out, which avoided everything about Israel, everything about why we were attacked and what it led to, and talked just about Bush, Cheney, and Rumsfeld, and avoided everybody in PNAC, everybody with a certain dual citizenship to foreign country A. It gets promoted by a known charlatan, and they selected pictures that would only promote their propaganda. Also, in the first loose change, they promoted the whole blue logo, no windows, possibly a pod on the plane that hit World Trade Center 1. This no-plane game was played out on all 4 plane attacks. Loose change also claimed that Flight 93 actually secretly flew and landed in Ohio, and they used Wikipedia for their sources over and over again. That's right, they didn't hit Building 7 on purpose, so they could land a plane in Ohio and blow the other building up with bombs. And everyone on Flight 77 and all of their family members are just pretending they're dead, as that flight, after a missile hit the Pentagon, turned invisible and flew away and also landed in Ohio. And then teams went in, knocked over lamp poles, and planted not only pieces of plane, but also DNA of all the victims. Because, you know, that scenario is so much more plausible. If you're going to land a plane in Ohio and hit a building with a missile, they're stupid. Now, either these little boys were fed a bunch of disinformation, or they're part of it. They're also not providing any evidence for a missile or explanation to how a plane going over 300 miles an hour just disappears. It certainly couldn't land that fast, and it didn't turn invisible and fly to Ohio, get the passengers reloaded onto another jet that crashed in the ocean. There is no reason to not just hit the Pentagon with the plane. There's nothing about the whole picture at all. They don't say anything about the anthrax. They don't say anything about the Iraq War and how it was wrongly associated to the anthrax, which was part of the 9/11 attacks. Look at the notes. Look at how it was originally blamed on Atta by the PNAC members, who said they had a meeting in Prague where he got this anthrax from Iraqi officials. That's what tied it all together and led to the war in Iraq. These two extremes of, oh, conspiracies never happen, the government doesn't lie, and, oh, aliens and missiles and pods and invisible planes, and those two extremes of accepting any conspiracy and rejecting any conspiracy categorically have got to go. Future alleged 9/11 hijackers Al-Hazmi and Al-Midhar lived openly in the U.S. under their real names, despite attending an Al-Qaeda summit meeting in Malaysia where they had been photographed, and their hub in Yemen being bugged. Both got visas from the CIA's fast-track program in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, as did a majority of the hijackers. But the CIA was preventing this information from reaching the FBI. Doug Matson of the 9/11 Commission's staff and former CIA deputy director expressed as much that the CIA was intentionally omitting information. And what's the gain by that? Well, you have to ask yourself, just how separate is Al-Qaeda and the CIA? Why are so many terrorists who attack U.S. targets ex-CIA? Furthermore, why are so many CIA agents blocking investigation into some of these same terrorists? They can fight side by side in Afghanistan, Chechnya, Bosnia, or Kosovo, but that's when they're our terrorists. We know the CIA isn't losing any sleep over the heroin trade being reopened in Afghanistan. Illegal drug markets are half the shadow economy for key Central Asian states like Azerbaijan, crucial in controlling non-OPEC Caspian oil and gas. Conflict in Afghanistan also forces oil west and down through the Israeli keyhole before it can go to East Asia. The only potential break in that monopoly now being a direct route from Iran. And look who's in the crosshairs. Of course, there was a moment after the Egyptian Revolution that Libyan oil could go through the Suez, but NATO took care of that. And China still wants its contracts from Gaddafi, though.
China worries over its Libyan interests as the unrest in Libya continues to unfold. The Chinese regime urged Libya's rebels to keep their oil trade agreements on Tuesday.
In light of the recent unrest and political changes in Libya, the Chinese regime is growing anxious over its existing deals in the tumultuous country.
Other crucial access ports without a Western military presence in the Gulf of Aden are Bassano, Somalia, and Aden of Yemen. So odd how the USS Cole bombing was in Aden in 2000, and it involved al-Midhar. But of course, he gets to live openly in the United States, and others allegedly involved in the USS Cole attack all escape or are released from prison. At least they went to prison. That's more than what was done after the USS Liberty attack. Was the USS Cole an al-Qaeda bombing, or was al-Qaeda a front for a false flag? Barbara Bodine blocked John O'Neill's investigations into the USS Cole bombing. The captain just happened to be a close personal friend of hers.
And irony is that the captain of the ship is a personal friend of mine, just one of those odd coincidences.
O'Neill probably wanted to answer the most obvious questions about the event, like, why was the Cole even there, instead of going to refuel in Bahrain as it was scheduled to do? How did the terrorists know it was going to be there? And just where did they get the C4? We may never know the answers because the investigation was about as open as the Oklahoma City investigation or the anthrax investigation. And once again, as always, the security footage of the event was edited and is useless. There's no footage of the attack. John O'Neill also had his investigation into bin Laden squashed, and his investigators pulled off hot trails.
They had been coming in and out of the U.S. on legal visas.
John O'Neill took a job with Kroll after being hired by Jerome Hauer, who was involved in the actual anthrax attack. Just 2 weeks after getting his job, John O'Neill died in the South Tower on 9/11. This could all be outrageous incompetence and coincidence, or it could be simple collusion. Then, look at the whole picture. It's hard to know where to start on 9/11. There's so many things wrong with the "we got attacked out of the blue because they hate us for our freedoms" ignorance. Lying about why someone would want to attack the United States is bad enough. But then listen to the story of who allegedly attacked the United States. The media said it was done by 19 Muslim guys who conveniently left us a list with their names and plans on it, as well as not one but 2 magical unburned passports. One discovered near Ground Zero by New York Police Chief Bernard Carrick, who is currently in jail for fraud. The other from Flight 93 of hijacker Zaid al-Jarrah, whose first cousin Ali al-Jarrah was later busted in Lebanon as a spy for Israel. They also left a nice, neat paper trail, complete with Korans left at strip clubs and bars by the devout Muslims. Some will say the list was left for their own fame. Only that doesn't make sense because officially the list of names was in the luggage of Muhammad Atta, who was taking it on his final flight, and just by chance his bag happened to not get checked in on his connection flight. Best of all, their leader, Osama bin Laden, who the U.S. intelligence agencies went out of their way to botch chances at apprehending, was said to be hiding in Afghanistan, a target of the U.S. well before 9/11. In fact, the U.S. already had invasion drills set in place prior to 9/11. Osama, whose name quickly became Osama, maybe to remove the USA at the front of it, was said to be in a high-tech cave in Afghanistan, plotting the next moves of al-Qaeda. The high-tech caves, which Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said there were many of,
and there's not one of those, there are many of those,
and the Pentagon drew up cartoons for, didn't actually exist. In 2011, Obama announced the U.S. had found and killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. No photos were released, and his body was dumped into the ocean.
Pakistan's on our side, Afghanistan is half and half, but right on that border is Osama bin Laden, most likely. And he's probably in Pakistan.
There was pre-written legislation ready to pass, and when it looked like it might not work, there was an anthrax attack to help push it along. This was initially blamed on al-Qaeda, who oddly, even though they hate us for our freedoms, decided to rope Israel into the mix as well by declaring "Death to America, death to Israel." And just in case you forgot it was Muslims from 9/11, they also wrote "Allah is great" and 9/11 2001 as well. Which is funny because it would later be the Israeli security forces claiming to have witnessed a transfer of anthrax from Iraqis to Al-Qaeda at a meeting in Prague, which was impossible since neither Iraq nor Al-Qaeda had anthrax, and there wasn't even a meeting in Prague for them to meet in. How does one witness a transfer of something at a meeting that didn't take place between two parties that didn't have it? The target choices of the military-grade made-in-the-USA anthrax were interesting as well. The two senators against the Patriot Act, Patrick Leahy, on the Judiciary chair in a position to block it, the other, Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader, also calling to investigate 9/11, were sent the lethal spores, whereas warmongering Fox News and Judith Miller, a WMD liar, were sent hoax anthrax. So they claimed. Despite all these holes in the anthrax story, it gets far worse. A letter written to the Department of Justice jumped the gun trying to frame someone for the attacks. The problem being, it was mailed 2 days after the first anthrax had been sent, but long before any of the letters had been opened or reported on. Worst of all, even though by December of 2001, the FBI knew it was looking at domestic terrorism, the anthrax myth persisted about Iraq, and Colin Powell used this scare tactic in his speech to the UN as evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, saying they could produce anthrax and kill thousands. Speaking about mobile weapons labs, a lie echoed by the now convicted criminal Judith Miller, who spent 85 days in jail over the Plain Libya affair, Powell said to the UN while holding a mock vial of anthrax.
For example, they can produce anthrax and botulinum toxin. In fact, they can produce enough dry biological agent in a single month to kill thousands upon thousands of people. And dry agent of this type is the most lethal form for human beings.
Cheney also reiterated this lie on Meet the Press, restating the same propaganda. The FBI ordered the Ames strain destroyed, and then went on a wild goose chase through different suspects who had been pegged by the ADL, and ultimately landed on a guy, Bruce Ivins, who had an odd suicide overdosing on Tylenol. Later evidence shows he could not have made the anthrax from his lab. Dr. Perry Mixell, also a prior suspect, also had a strange suicide. Of course, the Congress caved on the Patriot Act and both wars. A commission was finally set up to deal with investigating what happened on and prior to 9/11. It wasn't something the Bush administration wanted. Bush was adamant about blocking the formation of a commission to investigate 9/11. Well, why would the President of the United States not want 9/11 to be investigated? He battled with Tom Daschle, Majority Leader of the Senate and an anthrax target, about who would conduct an investigation. It wasn't until more than a year later that he conditionally permitted it. The conditions were that the Bush administration selected the commission heads, who then selected and controlled the commission. It's a little bit like hiring Dracula to guard the blood bank. It would be like hiring Madoff to investigate fraud. You might as well have a former head of the CIA investigate the Kennedy assassination, or have Boris Yeltsin investigate Boris Berezovsky. Wait, those last two actually did happen. Bush's first pick to chair the 9/11 Commission was Henry Kissinger, upon the advice of Karl Rove. Henry Kissinger, a crook with a rap sheet so long and involved in disastrous covert operations and lies that no one could take him seriously. He resigned not because of that, but because he didn't want to disclose his clients. Because of the obvious conflicts of interest and the utterly negative credibility, Kissinger finally removed himself from the position. That didn't stop his less well-known business partner from making the cut, James R. Thompson. An interesting phenomena occurred on 9/11 where individuals using the Israeli-based instant messenger service Otigo were warned about 9/11 before the attack. At least 2 individuals came forward about the warnings they had received. Certainly bin Laden wasn't warning these American Jews to avoid the towers. Someone else had prior knowledge. Hollinger Inc. and Hollinger Digital owns Onset Tech, which cooperates with the messenger software of Otago as well as Converse. When you pull up the board of directors for Hollinger, you'll find some nefarious characters: Henry Kissinger, Richard Pearl, and James R. Thompson from the 9/11 Commission. With Thompson on the 9/11 Commission, you can be damn sure they didn't look into Otago. It was Hollinger-owned papers also that spread the bogus rumor about 4,000 Jews not showing up to work on the day of 9/11. This served to obfuscate the very real forewarnings from Otago by masking it as pointless anti-Jewish rhetoric. Hollinger would later be used by Pearl to bolster his Iraq War investments, and then it had a large scandal with Conrad Black, of which Thompson was also a part of. He ended up not doing much on the commission at all for a year. But not to be outdone by that audacious selection for the commissioners, the Bush administration topped itself in see-through corruption by choosing Iran-Contra's Tower Commission chairman, who worked with Dick Cheney, to co-chair the 9/11 Commission as well. I guess if you do well with one whitewash, then why not another one? Hamilton was also sitting on advisory boards for the CIA. But don't worry, they could still go lower. Much, much lower. Even worse than Hamilton becoming the co-chairman was placing a Zionist warmonger, Philip Zelikow, who was plucked right out of Bush's own National Security Council to be the executive director for the commission. Zelikow would have total control over hiring the 9/11 Commissioner's staff and set up a tight filtering system over information sharing that went right through himself or Hamilton. One of his first actions was to hire Michael Hurley, a current officer in the CIA, to investigate the CIA. He also echoed the neocons' propaganda about Iraq and 9/11. How pathetic for the 9/11 Commission's executive director to parrot the baseless Iraq did 9/11 deceptions. It wasn't new for Zelikow, it was an opportunity to promote his worldview. In their book on the Israeli lobby, Mearsheimer and Walt exposed Zelikow for calling for war with Iraq to protect Israeli interests in speeches that he gave to universities. Zelikow would later admit as much with a so-what attitude. Apparently, he forgot the 9/11 Commission was to investigate an attack on America and not to be a tool for Israeli interest. No one was really looking into 9/11. They were looking into how to use it. There was one dissenter in Zelikow's way, a staff member that slipped through the cracks, Donna Lesman. Breaking Zelikow's filter protocol, Lesman dug into the direct 9/11 connections with the government of Saudi Arabia. Zelikow fired her and had her findings deleted from the 9/11 Commission's report, 28 pages redacted. Perhaps she asked how a Saudi GID agent working with the FBI was providing housing and actually living with 9/11 hijackers.
National security whistleblowers tried to testify before the commission, but were either not asked to testify or their testimony was only barely acknowledged, or worse yet, completely omitted from the record.
Zelikow was later revealed to be the real author of the Bush Doctrine, the justification of preemptive war, which has led to the deaths of more than 1 million people so far.
Zelikow was the author of a very important document issued by the White House in September 2002 that really turned military doctrine on its head and said that the United States could become involved in preemptive war, preemptive defense, that we could attack a nation that didn't pose an immediate military threat to this country. And obviously in September 2002, it sure appeared that that document was being written with one target in mind, Iraq. Now, as I say, the author of the document at the time was anonymous. We didn't know that Philip Zelikow had written this thing. And that becomes known, I think, widely on the staff only in the final months of the 9/11 Commission investigation, and it appeared to pose yet another conflict of interest for Zelikow.
Thomas Keane, the other co-chairman of the commission, was there about as often as Obama went to the Senate. He was too busy engaged in his own personal profiteering racket. He said he could only commit 1 day a week to the commission and would only appear in the press if it was with Hamilton. Apparently, investigating 9/11 was not important enough for him to postpone his other affairs, and this allowed Hamilton and Zelikow even more control over the operation. Like James Thompson, Thomas Keane was too involved with his own scandals. What excellent choices for investigators. It's not like 3,000 people were killed. Keene later promoted and was greatly impressed with the comic book version of the 9/11 report, which reduced it down to about 161 picture pages. And he's currently still going around the country hacking this junk into school systems to get elementary school kids even to learn about 9/11.
When you hear about the idea of the 9/11 Commission report as essentially a comic book, your first reaction is, what are you, crazy?
It's accurate. I mean, the graphic version is accurate. That's what happened.
How could they compromise the integrity of the investigation further? What could make it even less objective? Fred Fielding, a current lawyer for Z, better known as Blackwater, a private mercenary firm currently on trial for murder and rape. This bastard actually countersued the families of the contractors' victims hung from a bridge in Fallujah to block them from gaining access into the circumstances surrounding the event. The details of what really happened are uncovered in Jeremy Scahill's book, Blackwater, Rise of the Mercenary State. Fielding wasn't the only important investigator working with Blackwater. The Inspector General, who was supposed to let the other shoe drop on Hollinger and Richard Pearl, also found employment at Blackwater as a senior executive. You see the DVD extra to unravel that mess. Fielding was from George Bush's White House counsel, but don't worry, he was compromised further than that. He was a lawyer for a very high-level man in the Bush administration. You may have heard of him. His name is George Bush. It's bad enough that Bush refused to be interviewed by the commission without Cheney, but he also had his lawyer there, and on the side of the investigators.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you
Adam,
said?
you asked me that question yesterday. I got the same answer, yeah.
You're one of those four that gets to see these documents. Would that change your opinion?
No. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. The President has said only a minority of the Commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the Commission with the White House.
These blatant conflicts of interest should have been all over the news like a Tiger Woods sex scandal, but they were too busy promoting other things. The 9/11 Commission was a cover-up. It was a total joke, a farce. Heck, why not allow PNAC members to do the investigation? They did. John Lehman, former Secretary of the Navy in 1987, while Jonathan Pollard was spying for Israel through naval intel, was also chosen to join the 9/11 conmen, and he was a PNAC signature. PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, was a neoconservative think tank from the American Enterprise Institute. Its members comprised Department of Defense officials and media. They pulled together older Israeli-centric plans from Odin Yinon and IASPA's Clean Break papers to create their magnum opus, Rebuilding America's Defenses. There's been a lot of focus on lines from that particular document, but this narrow scope has overshadowed their other important works, particularly on Afghanistan and Iraq. I can't go over all of them, I have in previous films, but here's an overview. This is what the Lie Factory cranked out. Of course, these are also the men who lied about Prague, Atta, and Anthrax. The 9/11 Commission was an extension of the PNAC narrative of deception. Their report ignored the existence of core columns in the Twin Towers. The information on Saudi Arabia was redacted, and the info on Israel didn't even make it that far. Perhaps the most shocking and awful was their investigation into the World Trade Center No. 7. They didn't even do one. They spent $12 million to tell you nothing. Real American patriots have investigated it on their own for free. And trust me, it's an uphill battle against disinfo and ridicule. And a lot of people knew it was going to happen too. There were massive profits made. The crisis allowed for trillions of dollars to become unaccounted for. And the data that was housed that could track the massive corporate fraud was physically destroyed by the section of the Pentagon that was hit, as well as Building 7 in New York.
For the Pentagon, when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
Time to stop making excuses for the dogma and just admit something else happened. And factions in the U.S. were in on it, as well as Pakistani and Israeli intelligence, albeit with a green light from Uncle Sam. Same as the Israelis had during Iran-Contra and the 1967 war as well. Don't cling to 9/11 officialdom out of spite for the arrogant 9/11 kook movement. Be open to a factual inquiry. The government lies. They lied about Iraq, they are lying about the anthrax, and they are lying about 9/11. And if we're not careful, they will lie or stage something to start a war with Iran. You might be thinking, what are they, psychopaths? Yes! If you want a serious 9/11 proof movie, I made a 3-hour film with hours of extras, which you can watch right here. And people will ask me sometimes, why is it so long and complex? My answer is, it's supposed to be, because the reality is, it is complex. I'm sorry, I don't have any giant owls or satanic hand signals to hold the attention span of some of the spastic. War is always by deception. It's the same story for every war. The U.S. is always killing millions. Killed millions in Vietnam, killed over 1 million in Korea, 1 million in Iraq. We've murdered millions of people, but those aren't holocausts. Those are collateral damage. War is always by deception. Watch it now. It is a 9/11 film, but it is not getting into any of the kooky nonsense. Everything in this film is factual and provable and documented. This research is ongoing. I don't have all the answers. I'm still working on a presentation about Flight 93. I still have a lot of questions. I got questions about P-TECH, which I'm still looking into. I've got questions about Richard Blee's role at Tora Bora. I've got questions about many of the odd financial transactions that happened during 9/11, and comparing that to some of the same who jumped the gun prior to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. Britannia, there's still a lot of avenues to explore with real people and many questions, but I can tell you what's not helpful. Generically screaming Illuminati or sloganeering inside job without being able to articulate what really happened. So if you don't, this is a very serious accusation. So if you don't know the subject inside and out, you should wait a little while or get up to speed on it a little more before you do your activism. And I'd love to be wrong. If you want to critique my film or by deception, by all means critique the film. You gotta do a little bit better than the ADL did, just screaming anti-Semite. But if you're just going to talk trash about me, personally, it just shows you've got nothing to go on. If you want to trash my film and me, fine. But if all you're going to do is talk trash about me, it just shows you've got no argument and you can't defend your kooky BS that you've invested so much in that you can't back out of now because you'll look like an absolute moron. You can't back up your missiles, pods, invisible planes, aliens, or whatever BS you believe in. My word of advice for the kooks who just can't let go: grow up. You were lied to. Deal with it. You can either change your opinion now that you have new facts, or you can just maintain to dig a hole like an Obama supporter who makes excuses for him, despite him being the opposite of what they thought he was. You need to drop it. Jonestown and the rest of it isn't helping you. Yet, how do you prosecute the government? Obviously, they don't investigate themselves. Thus, the Inspector General of the Defense Department is just part of the military-industrial complex, and the 9/11 Commission was itself composed of PNAC members, war profiteers, and criminals of prior cover-ups. We can't rely on these investigations. Where is our media? The U.S. is always at war or part of some conflict, and it doesn't matter if you rename a war a police action or whatever. It's a war. The point of war for the U.S. is not to win, but to prolong. In order to operate, the MIC needs conflicts. Perpetual war is their openly stated goal. Perpetual war means perpetual profits. Ultimately, they aim to monopolize vital resources, destroy potential economic or military rivals, devalue currencies to wipe out the middle class, and rule with impunity as corporate oligarchs in a globalized shadow government. Let's declassify the evidence we already have. Let's see what was on the hard drives confiscated from Urban Moving Systems. Let's release the tapes of the Israelis celebrating with the towers burning in the background. Let's see what was redacted from the 9/11 report, removed to protect the money coming from Saudi Arabia. Let's see all of it. Let's have a real investigation into 9/11. I'm pretty damn sure what the results would be, but I'd like to have an official investigation rather than just me doing it. I want heads to roll. Pass this film around and make it happen.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.